Hello, Barbaderos slash Barbaderosis. I donated that to all the languages, by the way, to, to show this, that you have missed since some ancient times, that classified now as ancient, with left out and self value left out. No, how the databases have been criminally foreign influence slash hyper criminally foreign influence identities of relativity to ourselves. That's what slavery was. That's what Jim Crow laws were. And this preaching method that had sustained it also, that they would be defenses of themselves, right where they were self valuing, where it could use remotely to keep everyone, all natures of difference, syntactically the possession of systems individually grouped and together, tactical ulterior, from that which has the species volumes distinct. The birds are distinct, but they are non-distinct. They have two eyes. From the fish, from ourselves, from humanity. So with these wars, we could use scientific means to discern quickly how they were employed by a breaching method to keep blamed on other things, others ourselves. All the things that should have been blamed on a breaching method. But this breaching method also employed people hyper additionally, as names of jobs says location slash S. Uses by this breaching method before computers, before America's founders were born, before Russia's founders were born. So Judge Napolitano has a YouTube channel called Judging Freedom. He used to be one of the Fox News employees as a retired judge. I believe it was of a superior court because he reported one day when he started, he had 400 arraignments in one day in New Jersey. And so, in other words, the quality of fact treatment nature. Plus, look at this simultaneously. New York City, the way the design it is simultaneously, where all those people need food. And the suburbs were designed not to people for people to need food from other locations. That while being a landscape theater, having only had known nature's demonstrations of it as negative value nature progressions, acts, and nature, limitations in place of evolution's words, fruits, gifts, means out of nowhere actually discernible. So there's a difference between positive that is criminal insidiousness, nature of positive, and positive that is also positive onto its system. Five identities are positive distinctly. For example, being five hyper, in other words, the value of truth before the order of the finite, the smallest finite detail thing, the order of the finite is the second. The value of what is grouped or active is the third part of what is simultaneous slash hypersimultaneous. There's also three ways grouped, and it's five ways grouped, where we are sequence nature. For example, then the third, so that's the third, is grouped active, and the fourth is progressive. And I'm reading the rules of English from the nature of English itself, slash languages. And the ancients appreciated the differences of the other language because we're learning, it's how it shows us. The questions or the value of what came first. And the answers at the same time. Revelation come from truths that are of those five ways true. Valuing what is sequence true. Valuing a quality of fact, true nature that's at the streets, not lying, so they can force a quality of fact, true nature for apparent motivations, even when real, at criminal and civil cases. Originally and still used remotely, the difference of that or collusions as the interbranch names, forcing a quality of fact, true nature as collusion/s with the breaching method that had everyone speaking about crimes while they were roles of predicate acts with facts. Way worse. And as collusions. And just making things up. And increasingly the breaching method, just doing it for everyone. Per the part of how it measures and maintains. Has complete possession over questions. Tactical ulterior. It has complete possession over convictions, over theories, let alone convictions. Still, all syntactically manifest things. So, in other words, they have had replaced what we would have found had people referred to evidences properly and been honest with reception. See, but they have increasingly too. The prisons were involved also. Where and how they used all location/s remotely originally, and still they show them needs to hide life progressions from things that already were, from things that are active now, formally, because this is where forgiveness is needed. Otherwise, they're going to keep leaving out their collusion/s and just making things up. And pulling people into it because everything's they have readings of statutes and precedents abridged. Simultaneously, the torture, extortion, slavery method, and they have to pretend otherwise they are sentenced. The judges, they're told also not to litigate from the bench. But the bench was told to get the Constitution unabridged. In other words, everyone was a certain type of victim/hyper victim. Since you're the youngest age, if you use them where you actually had to discern these abridgments, it pulls up where and how. The theater/hyper theater. When I say theater/hyper theater, of our names, our employments by nature. But now it is hyper through theater, through and as systems tactical ulterior, from how nature has us animate. And why? And by what means is the observation of the simultaneously increasing value/s of the extent of what we could discern that it's true always and positive unto itself. In other words, those 5 ways. Like we know to an extent progressive of the future about the seasons. And we know that they're increasingly valuable even when they're not here. Even when they're gone. Vaccines, a song. So makes each fighter shush. Shush. In other words, boxing, martial arts, and wrestling are about fighting, but by the rules. But they have stayed abridged. So you have not been, everyone has missed how we could appreciate how there's one, the identity that scientists share will only stay positive unto itself. Earth's a special difference is forced away from here while we stay, let alone stay still valued. Systems tactical ulterior from its own. Forgiveness is because that was forced. and that has direct relativity to where and how no one will prevent no one allows the quality of fact nature at all locations and simultaneously needs to pretend other relative to these to vertical and horizontal confessions slash s usage roles with use slash s of that use singularly by what we must refer to per nature. I'm not even a lawyer, as a hyperarchetypal criminal enterprise. And this is how we overcome the finite group. In other words, for example, I'll donate the script for and everyone will put it, in other words, for temporary, they have war games. We can make temporary logistical easings on nuclear holding countries because clearer than day they're in the same trap being haven't been used remotely because a breaching method that came from semi-ancient times needs increasingly to have other things, others, or selves blamed, where and how nature is demonstrating a breaching method is a scientific value. It was the cause for slavery. It was, in other words, it was a part of it. It was a part of how they affected that and the causes of it. Blamed on other things, others, or selves, even though nobody wanted that. They made exceptions, but without anyone realizing. They made people speak, for positive and negative anyway. So for identity anyway. In other words, for wealth, for value of money, and the security of it, leaving out the breaching methods, employments of that for the torture, extortion, and fact-cheating nature. Slavery, therefore, physically slavery, not just of Americans' founders, and we're right through our schools at each age, sickly, they would distinctly others communicate here and there for our own here and for their own there. Vaccines. So I teach those things alone. So in other words, one thing all we have to do is admit that, in other words, in acceptation of the value of voting and or of democracy. These are things shown to people to respond to negative value nature progressions, acts of nature, where science shows that those negative value nature progressions, acts of nature were designed to be forced to be blamed on other things, others themselves, because that breaching method caused it. But everywhere that is observable, simultaneously observable, are people blaming other things, others themselves, as individuals with logic and natures reliant upon other types of experts. And that is reliant upon, in other words, names A through Z have been bound and are forced to be natures of independence tactile ulterior from how the species volume has the species body of individual bodies has A through Z assigned. Prepare each mind. Vaccines. I teach us things but law. In other words, we set up where there's wars and things, it's manifest, nature's demonstrations. Worst. And right now we're to agree to put a new nature of temporary industry to make a temporary / lasting positive value nature progression action nature and means by it where if it becomes a criminal and citizens nature that means to cause positive, we sense that. Real evolution science / S only feels like game / S or else we sense. And this is how you bring security. And with economic values, you cannot leave them apart. In readings of statutes, we can't leave out the part of having the Constitution unabridged, the relativity of free speech to the part of us having rights that are too numerous to list with the Ninth Amendment, I believe. Judge Napolitano, I learned on his channel. We have rights that are too numerous to list. I also learned from my father that James Madison, that Marbury versus Madison means real justice must satisfy all appearances of real justice, black pupils. So we know since founding we've had an abridgment, and there has been uses of our names and of the relativity of our names to databases and what is typed in those databases and what is spoken relative to it. We also know that theories that are still formally standing, they are being and haven't been employed to measure and maintain the nature of the logic associated with the backing of it can't entertain itself and afford to be voiced, let alone to protract what we already know, which can be used to show that they are tactically delusions throughout theories and employed functional, like the theory of relativity, per uses of it. So we have to use the hyper-evidential, the nature of the debate, nature of questions, including of prosecutors and judges. They are fishing to not be discerned, where and how, in other words, directors of agencies too, backed into uses of their difference. There has been stayed collusions with all kinds of natures of organized crime and predicate acts with facts method /S. This is exactly what black pupils is assigning black and white to mean other than they do. They still have black themed, KKK themed, Confederate flag themed right on Facebook, planting evidences and fake motivations with the state judicial branch offices, state corrections offices, inter-services. Even on off the Indian reservations, roles with Indian intelligence. They have complete cultural possession of all natures of difference. Native Americans, I had to fight with Native Americans before our founders were even born. At colonies that were the possession of countries that were themselves the possession, also groupings of them, also the companies within those countries. We have been systems since before that. This breaching method knew that everyone would have to increasingly self-value uses of names. Tactical ulterior from how nature uses names, because nature communicates with difference. Begin with how we have with the same colorized and different colorized at the same time. It's difference we're discerning, which comes with also with hyper difference. It shows us the difference of the subject and of the verb. It shows us also why we need more than one name for a verb to discern its complete identity. And to value properly the sequence truth and the value of that to come, which we know of. To an extent, we know of completely now. We know the value of the spring. So when increasingly the opposite is increasingly so too, because we have been systems tactile ulterior from its own. So just the cost of things relative to the square miles involved, and in other words, this breaching method set up New York City. So in other words, if you have a kid all natures of industry. In other words, these are unnatural. And the suburbs the same way. Say the suburbs, you need food from other locations. So all these people are hungry, and we had the names game, leaving out the breaching method. We could simultaneously refer to as hyper additionally, because it is hyper additional things. So I'm not a lawyer, not police form, not criminal, not judge, not military. But this supersedes those the syntax and those readings of statutes because they have stayed on a bridge. They have stayed roles, collusion/s. Not wanting people, but without realizing because with natures of private industries, overt criminal enterprises, private ones, and like directions to hide lies about how they have other countries with nuclear weapons, like Russians and Americans, are together here, and like with psychiatry databases and fire databases and other campuses and people associated with them at the same time with overt criminal enterprises and private ones and people tied to them and their family members, and they all run in and hide life progressions by using little tricks where people say truth. In other words, one of the things they do that is manifest now, where we have victims/hyper victims, is weird in how they keep victim predator/hyper predator and pretending other for itself. Because the breaching method knew that, again, that we would have to increasingly blame a breaching method because it's being demonstrated to us. Jim Crow laws were about a breaching method more than they were about any other thing, not just slavery. One of the most overt / simultaneously insidious examples of why and how our founders didn't have free speech, and of why and how they had to hide their actual motivations, and of why and how everyone, same reasons, is used to plant fake motivations. Because that's one of the things that the breaching method knew would be demonstrated to us. And right where and how it knew we'd need types of experts. And where we could force, trick, hurt, and persuade us to value the value of expertise as means only to keep equality of fact, human nature as criminal insidiousness / hypercriminal insidiousness. We can read the law from the nature of the law itself, too. Ugh. All I have to know is that James Madison, too. They have other communicated for him, so. And the founders behind him that went, and then George Washington agreed to help them and to use his plan, James Madison's, and then to counter-extort, to create the other founders out of nowhere. Now, there's a difference between how the founders were counter-extorted and regarding motivations, too. Whoa, see, for example, this is where someone starts defending, oh, well, this person says it's because it was the pamphleteers and they're mad about the tea tax in Boston. There was slavery entrenched at the same time. You guys have been child abused to have with its simultaneous and with exceptions and exception nature. Treatments of all natures of positive and negative as criminal insidiousness as collusions for where and how nature communicates through with the invisible / hyper invisible, but still discernible, as are the value of these physical subjects we see in life and the space which is juxtaposed, physically discernible and invisible, but still discernible. And the reason why and how there are more than one name for a verb, how the participle natures are about this, and how they are coupled is simultaneously how they are a trinity, and it's about how they're grouped 1/5 ways, distinct identities of hyper invisible but still discernible. And this shows when in the stages of understanding this and communicating about it, then it shows that there is also in other words, it is 3 identities of volume as value as nature / nature as value. And nature as value / value as nature being true simultaneously, distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously, hyper simultaneously. And this is what we discern when we discern truth. That is not a criminal insidious nature of truth. So, for example, a truth used for a lie, and regardless of who did it, and hyper additionally, from where and how the motivations are narratives and natures are inseparable. Per also needs to use the hyper evidential, which the hyper evidential in science proper shows that there was the employment of apparent motivations and of that sustained to also where the records and summaries and defenses of summaries of history and of the active and of what's to come are distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously multi-front tools of a consciously hyper-simultaneous mimic of proper employment of names A through Z that knew correctly. Everyone would just play along at locations A through Z around the globe. And the only way that they would be able to defend postures of practicality or of aggression, justifications of it simultaneously, would be to defend logic with as uses of names A through Z as systems tactilitarian than its own, and being and having been used remotely by a singular use /s of us by A through Z, at countries A through Z, at locations, areas, and states A through Z, sickly distinctly from the overall names part. And this effectively propagated, self-cultivated, needed now. Other things, others, ourselves, blamed. Right where people get hurt the most by it, including countries, so everyone at once. No one has valued service people. Where house counts, you guys would have realized. Use /s of all leaders' names, like Hitler. You don't blame Hitler. In other words, you don't blame any leader, leaving out that semi-ancient trap that came. Was Jesus Christ provided a quality of fact tribunatory at courts? Were they asking questions for properly? Nature shows us. Sometimes it's the smallest finite detail which more important, or it's the value of what came true first. Like, for example, nature shows us revelations come from understanding the value of understanding how before America's founders were born, already sustained against Native Americans. They have been forced, tricked, hurt, and persuaded to, to value. They had no choice but to value more and more being a part of systems tactical ulterior. From the one that uses the ground, too, how we are hyper additionally the ground's voicings, the water's voicings, the air's, now, but through systems tactical ulterior from its own. In other words. And they replace the negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures that caused the breaching method, which is what they were all trying to say while they were just doing their job. They were saying that. In other words. So and then at other locations too, they're saying it. And the difference between those jobs of work criminal enterprises, the private ones, insidiousness of logic of names A through Z, with instances and names descriptions. Formal and other. Both of those are coupled to measure and maintain. In the past, active, and to come. People will be in defenses of roles with formal questions and for formal record keepings that are effectively being and having been totally fabricated. And the motivations for it are increasingly other than increasingly hyper additional apparent ones. And actual ones are because of the method that was entrenched here as hyper sophistication before our founders were even born. So it is why how they could get away with communicating other for James Madison than he communicated. Therefore, it's relative to how they get away with interpretations of Marbury versus Madison, and where and how all real justice must satisfy all appearances of real justice. Black pupils. So, in other words, there are means. This is also we can make hyper positives out of negatives. There's a difference between making hyper positives out of negatives and making positives out of negatives that are criminal insidious natures of positives. As collusion, it's not just because they're collusion with the breaching method, because they make it harder and harder for people to show others or to discern themselves. The breaching method. A breaching method is a scientific value that is inseparable from any proper treatment of what American history's worst caused things were about, like slavery, like what caused Native Americans A through Z to fight with each other, even after we were born. Why and how the North and the South was still entrenched with slavery right up to the end of the Civil War. The North too. And look at what it left. And what go flip a burger or go work really hard, 2 or 3 of you in New York City. In other words, in the suburbs too. Where's the food coming from? All we have to do is admit, and so we have market positions with foods and commodities and prices like that. We could use art to put stability there. And for temporary / lasting positive value nature progression action. And in other words, and for means, we can't jump from we have so many people that are homeless around the world and borders problems around the world with countries that have all the means in the world. But such things connected to other things. Because this breaching method employed all identities of formal voicings and names. At the same time with overt criminal enterprises, private ones, insidiousness of A through Z. at location/S with those negatives that it caused already having been blamed on other things other than themselves. And that already having been used remotely where it is manifest in the styles of the logic and nature that are hyper evidentially discernible. Where and how you guys have been child abused, A through Z, having had other communicated for our founders regarding what caused things like slavery and, and abuses of Native Americans. As our founders too. They are 1/3 of our founders. With the rest of the founders behind James Madison, who then went and got George Washington to agree to force the other founders, and everyone had to hide their motivations and what led up to it, had to blame it on other things other themselves, and truly, even the truth they had to use realize themselves, because they had to entertain questions, and they had to entertain answers and as collusions. Otherwise, they would be sensed by the breaching method. I mean, imagine how hard it is to keep a whole bunch of people with sickly distinctly. That's when I say a whole bunch of people, that's everyone, the whole species body, sickly distinctly too. Her check, in other words, styles of fact nature. This is where we fix everything. This is where we are quality. Some ways more than physical. That's why our physical never gets free. The suburbs in Russia and America, they still have they were still of that design tactility nature. By the breaching method that forced all modern countries to value their own name, all groupings associated with them, and all voicings for humanity as systems tactile from nature, from the Constitution unabridged, from the campuses of the Republic for which we stand unabridged. See, we don't have lawyers capable properly because they still have collusion/S, where they plant evidences and fake motivations roles still. While all sides of criminal and civil cases and the lawyers and their family members. Same thing with the even judges, prosecutors, the campuses they went to, the family members of everyone. That's how, and then everyone who lives next to everyone next to the parks, next to the campuses. They're putting everyone in faked and changed communications with themselves for how originally instilled all formal identities of the law were and are used remotely. Now, Russia and America has roles with psychiatry, with ones with badges associated with prisons and with military and with courts and their family members who have also been intercampuses identity fraud slanders behind people's backs. Then they make little fake exceptions because that's where everywhere it is discernible. Collusion/S or overt/insidious exception nature is being gotten. They're pretending what they think, and they're trying to make fake exceptions to justify it. So, in other words, and they know, the intelligence community knows that the agencies and the police forms communicate other than they pretend, and they lie about their motivations. They want to restrict that to courts. They already have collusions with them because they had no choice. They were a certain type of victims since they were kids who had other things other than themselves, blamed then the breaching method. For example, for what caused slavery, for what caused, for what they're speaking. because anything else is wrong. Boxing, c'est ça. Oh, yeah. I tell you clear.